Good afternoon. Bon après-midi tout le monde. Merci.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us again, once again. Our representatives from the Office of the Auditor General. Today we are going to study Report 3, Preparing Indigenous Offenders for Release of the Fall 2016 Reports of the Auditor General of Canada.
Welcome, Mr. Michael Ferguson, Canada's Auditor General, and Madam Carol McCalla, who is the principal in charge of the audit. And from Correctional Service Canada, we have the Commissioner, Mr. Don Head, and Madam Anne Kelly, Senior Deputy Commissioner. Welcome to all of you. And you have statements, introduction statements to make, all of you. So, Mr. Ferguson, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present the results of our report on how Correctional Service Canada prepares Indigenous offenders for release back into the community. Almost 3,800 Indigenous men and women were in federal custody at the time of our audit. Correctional Service Canada is mandated to provide rehabilitation programs and services to meet the unique needs of Indigenous offenders. As well, when making case management decisions, staff are required to consider an Indigenous offender's Aboriginal social history. Indigenous peoples represent 3% of Canadian adults, but they make up a growing proportion of the federal offender population. As of March 2016, Indigenous offenders represented 26% of all offenders in federal custody. Although Correctional Service Canada cannot control the number of Indigenous offenders receiving federal sentences, it can provide them with timely access to rehabilitation programs and culturally appropriate services, which can influence how long and how many offenders remain in custody. We found that as the Indigenous offender population grew, Correctional Service Canada could not provide them with the rehabilitation programs they needed when they needed them. Most Indigenous offenders in federal custody were serving short-term sentences, which means that they became eligible for release after serving 1 year of their sentences. However, more than 3/4 of the offenders we examined were unable to complete their rehabilitation programs in that time because they were not given timely access to the programs they needed.
Parole supervision is a highly effective way to support the successful return of an offender to the community. However, we found that 2/3 of released Indigenous offenders had never been on parole. Half of these offenders were released directly from medium or maximum security institutions back into the community, which means that they had less time to benefit from a gradual and structured release until the end of their sentence. Overall, Correction Service Canada prepared Indigenous offenders for parole hearings less often than non-Indigenous offenders, and when they did it, it was later in their sentence. Correctional Service Canada used the custody rating scale to help determine an offender's security level and need for a rehabilitation program. More than 3/4 of Indigenous offenders were sent to medium or maximum security institutions upon admission, which was at significantly higher levels than for non-Indigenous offenders. Once in custody at higher levels of security, few Indigenous offenders were assessed for a possible move to a lower level before release, even after they completed their rehabilitation programs.
Assessment tools did not address the specific needs of Indigenous offenders nor consider their Aboriginal social history as required. Moreover, these assessment tools could have resulted in higher than necessary referrals to rehabilitation programs. Although Correctional Service Canada had developed better tools, it had not yet put them into use. Correctional Service Canada has provided several culturally specific programs and services for Indigenous offenders. However, access to these services was uneven across institutions. For example, healing lodges were designed to meet the unique needs of Indigenous offenders, but they did not exist in all regions. There were none in Ontario, where approximately 500 Indigenous offenders were located. We found that offenders who participated in Healing Lodge programs had very low rates of reoffending upon release, yet Correctional Service Canada had not examined ways to provide greater access to more Indigenous offenders. Correctional Canada.
Correctional Service Canada also contracts with elders to work with offenders and deliver culturally specific rehabilitation programs. However, we found that staff did not take this work into account when they made recommendations to the Parole Board of Canada. Without this information, the Parole Board would not be able to appropriately consider the offender's potential for successful release. We are pleased that Correctional Service Canada has agreed with our recommendations and committed to take corrective action to improve results for Indigenous offenders. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and we would be happy to answer any questions the members of committees may have. Thank you.
Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Head.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to discuss Auditor General's performance audit on preparing Indigenous offenders for release and the accompanying recommendations. The report examined whether the Correctional Service of Canada provides timely correctional interventions to incarcerated Indigenous offenders and assessed its performance in assisting with their rehabilitation and reintegration efforts. It makes 8 recommendations to improve Indigenous offenders' conditional release opportunities, including ensuring timely access to culturally specific correctional programs and interventions, documenting progress and risk reduction associated with participation in culturally specific interventions and the associated impact on the offender's security level, and ensuring consideration of the Aboriginal social history in case management documentation and decisions. CSC fully accepts the Auditor General's findings and recommendations and is currently implementing measures to address them. CSC is committed to supporting Indigenous offenders with a revised approach that will focus our efforts to support their successful and safe rehabilitation and reintegration into the community at rates comparable to non-Indigenous offenders. While CSC cannot control the number of Indigenous Canadians receiving federal sentences of incarceration, our work and interventions can ultimately impact, to some degree, the length of time these offenders remain in custody, the security level of the institution they are managed in, and the timing of the presentation of their cases to the Parole Board of Canada for conditional release decisions. Our goal is to reduce the gap in successful community reintegration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous offenders. CSC is committed to enhancing its capacity to provide effective programs and interventions for Indigenous offenders and is working collaboratively with criminal justice partners and community stakeholders to support the rehabilitation and safe reintegration of Indigenous offenders into the community. To achieve this, I'll be working closely with my senior executive team to achieve the progress and sustainable results that Canadians expect. I'd like to share some demographic information with you about CSC's Indigenous offender population. CSC continues to observe an increase in its total Indigenous offender population. At mid-year, in the fiscal year 2016-2017, Indigenous offenders represented 23.1% of the total offender population, accounting for 26.5% of those in custody and 17.4% of those on some form of conditional release in the community. Furthermore, over 1/3 of incarcerated women are Indigenous, representing 36.7% as of January 15, 2017. The Indigenous offender population differs from the non-Indigenous offender population in a number of areas. For instance, and looking at global statistics, Indigenous offenders tend to be younger, more likely to have served previous youth and or adult sentences, incarcerated more often for violent offense, and more inclined to have gang affiliations and have higher risk and needs ratings. It is important to state that CSC's approach to Indigenous corrections will continue to be culturally sensitive to and inclusive of Indigenous communities in order to provide the most effective correctional outcomes, and in turn, contribute to the best possible public safety results for Canadians. Providing effective programs for Indigenous offenders is a key priority for CSC. And while we have made significant progress in identifying and addressing the specific needs of Indigenous offenders, we recognize that more work remains to be done. CSC's approach to Indigenous corrections is based on the Aboriginal Continuum of Care model, which was established in 2003 in close collaboration with elders and members of Indigenous communities. This approach begins at intake, is followed by institutional paths of healing, and ultimately supports the reintegration of Indigenous offenders into the community. The model provides the flexibility necessary to respect the diversity of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. As part of the Aboriginal Continuum of Care, CSC offers elder services, Aboriginal liaison services, Aboriginal correctional programs, pathways initiatives, Inuit elder liaison and programming resources, Aboriginal women's programs and services, release planning and reintegration services, as well as healing lodges for both women and men. These interventions are integral to CSC's strategic plan for Aboriginal corrections and the Inuit strategy. Additionally, with an offender's consent, release planning is completed in consultation and collaboration with Indigenous communities' participation, as per Section 84 of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act. With input from the National Aboriginal Advisory Committee, CSC continues to develop and provide a number of Indigenous-specific programs and services to improve correctional results for Indigenous offenders and respond to the disproportionate representation of Indigenous individuals incarcerated federally. Further to this, CSC also makes targeted efforts to recruit and retain Indigenous employees to assist in the delivery of Indigenous interventions to provide culturally relevant perspectives. As a result, CSC is the largest employer of Indigenous peoples in the core public service. In moving forward with the Auditor General's recommendations, CSC will be innovative in its approach to Indigenous corrections in keeping with the spirit and intent of the Gladue principles. We will look for ways to improve and enhance several key areas of our policies and operations by examining how individual offender cases are managed. We will review our assessment procedures to ensure offenders' security levels are determined by considering individual Aboriginal social history factors, and that parole officers are proactively preparing offenders, especially low-risk offenders, for presentation to the Parole Board of Canada for decision by the first eligibility date. Continuing to increase the availability of and access to culturally relevant programs tailored to the needs of Indigenous offenders is a key priority. Working to fully implement the Aboriginal Integrated Correctional Program model to ensure that Indigenous offenders have access to the right correctional programs at the right time to support their successful release is also a priority. Optimizing the roles of our elders and spiritual advisors and the use of pathways initiatives and healing lodges to provide strong, structured, and culturally supportive environments for Indigenous offenders on the path to rehabilitation and reintegration is another one of our key priorities. And also enhancing our collaboration with Indigenous communities and partners to help increase their participation in the management of Indigenous offenders' sentences and successful reintegration as part of the CCRA Section 84 release planning process is also a priority. I must stress that my organization cannot do this alone. CSC will continue to work closely with our partners in the criminal justice system, Indigenous organizations, and community stakeholders to address the needs of Indigenous peoples. Together, we can work to close the gap in correctional results between Indigenous and non-Indigenous offenders. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I would like to reiterate to you what I wrote to Mr. Ferguson in our response to the OAG's report and findings, which is that this report marks a milestone in Canada's correctional history. I sincerely believe it is a catalyst for strengthening our nation-to-nation and Inuit-to-Crown relationships with Indigenous peoples, and offers the opportunity to deliver a coordinated and cohesive strategy for improving reintegration results for Indigenous offenders. With that, Madam Chair, I thank you for the opportunity to meet today and welcome any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Head. So I'd like to go to Ms. Shanahan for the first set of questions for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. To say that this report is shocking, I think is only starts to describe the reaction that I think all of us here on the panel had when we were reading this report. Indeed, when we read, and I'm sure this is information that is readily available, but when we read that Indigenous offenders, this is on page 1 of the Auditor General's report, Indigenous offenders accounted for 26% of all offenders in custody in 2015-2016, and in particular, Indigenous women make up 36% of female offenders in custody, whereas the population, the general population, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You know this. What I'm trying to get to is that, and this question is for Mr. Head, the CSC has had an approach to rehabilitating Indigenous offenders since 2003, over 10 years. Can you tell us how many of the incarcerated have access to that rehabilitation program today?
Yes, thank you. A very good question. All offenders have access to all the mainstream programs at any given time. With Indigenous offenders, they have the ability to choose to go down a path that is more specific to their cultural needs. And those are the kinds of opportunities that would have them engaging with elders, possibly participating in the Pathways initiatives in several of our institutions, possibly even going to healing lodges as part of their gradual de-escalation of security levels.
I understand, Mr. Head, but so that has been described to us that those programs are available, but apparently not everyone is getting access to it. In fact, a very small number. Can you tell us today, the committee today, how many, a percentage of how many people are actually able to access those culturally appropriate programs, are able to get into them, are in them?
But it's driven by the to a large extent it's driven by the desire of the offender. So we have Indigenous offenders who choose not to go down down the path that would lead to healing lodges. Some will take the mainstream programs, so they have access to all the mainstream programs, and those that choose to go down the path of the healing lodge and pathways, they're there. So in terms of looking at percentage, it's hard to give you the number that you're looking for. I can tell you where we stand in terms of the healing lodge beds that we have and how many are used. I can tell you about the Pathways initiatives and how many offenders are participating there. I can tell you about the numbers of individuals that have Section 84 release plans. But like I say, some of that is driven by the offenders themselves.
So if you don't have that information for us today, can you provide that to the committee then at a later, in writing?
Yes, most definitely. Yes,
yeah,
no problem.
Very good. Because what I'm seeing is that, in fact, there are conditions attached to access to those programs that the offenders, and correct me if I'm wrong, have to be in minimum security, whereas most of the offenders are in medium or higher security. Can you clarify the access there and what measures you've taken to look at who can actually realistically access the program?
Yeah, most definitely. So we offer pathways units in various security levels. So it's not just minimum security that the pathways initiatives are available. And we have elders in all levels of security, maximum, medium, and minimum. The access to the healing lodges are for individuals who have been classified as minimum security. They are facilities that are not defined by fences. They're very much an open concept institution. What we're doing going forward is trying to accelerate both the intake assessment and the involvement into those programs literally in the first month or two that they come into the system, as opposed to what was happening before, which could have been up to 150, 160 days before individuals were becoming involved in programs. So we're targeting literally the first week that they come into the institution, that their assessments are going to include asking them which stream that they're interested in pursuing. They will be staying in the intake units and starting their program primers, and in some cases actually starting their full programs while they're still in intake, and not waiting until they've been transferred to another institution. The other big change that we are putting in place is that we will be changing the lens in which we look at offenders who have completed the program. We're going to take a bit of what we call a presumptive transfer to lower security upon completion of the program. So that what the parole officers would have to do now is sort of the reverse of what they're doing today, is that once an offender has completed their program, the assumption is that they are now ready to be transferred to lower security.
Chair, do I have any time? Yeah, 1 minute. Mr. Head, just before we complete our time, I would like to hear from you, though. How is it that most, in the Auditor General report, the Auditor General found that most offenders still left at the prescribed time without receiving any rehabilitation help? And I would like that to be explored throughout this meeting. If you have some time to answer that now, that's...
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
okay,
yeah. It's not that the offenders were not getting any programming or any intervention opportunities. I deferred to the OAG to clarify their statement. But what we found with Aboriginal offenders, based on the assessment tools that were being used, is that they were being referred to more programs than what was possibly necessary, and therefore they were being kept at certain security levels and certain institutions for longer periods of time. So the approach that we're taking now is that after they've completed the program, there will be a presumption that their security level is being reduced, and therefore being moved to a lower level security, which should in turn position them much sooner for a submission to the parole board for a conditional release consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Shanahan. Now, Mr. Jennerhu, for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much for being here today, both your offices. I want to get to CSC. In your response to recommendation 3.97, the agency says that you will implement the use of the Criminal Risk Index as it is a more appropriate tool for Aboriginal offenders. Could you comment on the difference between the CRI and what's used with the other offenders, and is it a different program that they use?
Yes, the Criminal Risk Index is an assessment tool that we found through our research that is it does not appear to have any potential bias built into it. So therefore, it's not going to suggest that an individual be classified at a higher level or held in a higher security level. There were some questions around some of the other tools that we had been using as to not necessarily the validity, but whether there was a bias in the tool. The current research that has been going on for the last little while is indicating that to us that the criminal risk index will be a much better tool and will actually facilitate the assessments much quicker than the use of the previous tools.
Okay. To the Auditor General, Mr. Ferguson, what particular characteristics would you suggest, or are you looking for CSC to put in place for that indicator?
If I understand, that's in terms of the criminal risk index?
Yes, please, yeah.
Well, I think really what we were identifying was at the time of the audit, CSC was using the custody rating scale to assign Indigenous offenders to their programming, their rehabilitation programming. And the custody rating scale was primarily a scale designed to assign an offender to a level of security. It wasn't designed specifically to assign rehabilitation programming to the offender, whereas the criminal risk index is a tool that is more appropriately used to assign programming to offenders. So that's, and they had already discovered the tool and they had already piloted it. So our comment was, well, if it looks like that tool is perhaps better than the custody rating scale tool to assign programming to offenders, then CSC should consider using that tool for all offenders, including the Indigenous offenders.
Okay, so if I understand, the rehabilitation piece of it was missing from the original?
So again, the correctional service was, when an offender came in, they applied the custody rating scale. So they assessed the offender using that tool, the custody rating scale. By definition, custody rating, it's a tool that was primarily designed to say what level of custody should this person be held at, maximum, medium, minimum, okay? But they were also using that tool, which was designed to say what level of custody should the offender be held at. They were also using that tool to say what programming should we assign this person to, what rehabilitation programming should we assign them to, and the tool wasn't really designed for that. Now, given that perhaps at one point it was the only tool they had, maybe it was originally the only approach they could use. But then we discovered that they had found and piloted the criminal risk index, which was a tool that was more designed to be able to identify programming that an offender should use. So we simply said, well, since you've already identified that, since you've already started using it in some cases, you should consider using it for assigning programming to Indigenous offenders as well.
Okay. And so, Mr. Head, you had piloted this program, but you hadn't implemented it, and now with the Auditor General's suggestions, you plan to implement it? Is that?
Yes, we were planning on implementing it, but the Auditor General pointed out to us that we probably should have implemented it earlier, or and need to move on it quicker, and that's we've accepted that recommendation.
He's helpful like that.
Very much so.
Yes. Switching gears slightly, could you comment on the prevalence of gang membership in the Aboriginal prisoner population? Could you compare that to the prevalence in other ethnocultural subpopulations?
Yes, for us, one of the challenges we have, particularly in the prairie regions, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, is the prevalence of Aboriginal gangs, and it's one of the challenges that we have in terms of placement of certain individuals into certain penitentiaries to be able to follow their rehabilitation plan. When you with the myriad of different gangs that are there and their conflicts, we cannot have the Native Syndicate in with this gang or that gang, and so we're very careful about how we place individuals. Sometimes that creates some problems in terms of integrating individuals on ranges or integrating individuals in an institution overall. But the Aboriginal gangs in the Prairie region are the fastest growing group of gangs that we have to face.
And so that means there's a higher prevalence of them then. Is it not just in the prairies? Is it
primarily in the prairies? And it's about I think it's around 18% of the Aboriginal offenders compared to 8% of the general population. So just a little over double which is problematic for us.
And do you have any reason for the disparity? Any indications why?
Well, part of it stems from things that have developed earlier on in terms of these individuals' encounters with the criminal justice system, particularly youth going through youth centers and provincial systems. They become associated with gangs and obviously carry over. What we found is that, and this is one of the things that, although the Auditor General didn't point it out to us, it really is part of what's behind some of the issues that we've been tackling, is the fact that if we do not, in my words, surround an Indigenous person when he comes into the centre, into one of our correctional centres, right at the beginning, and start to get them engaged in their correctional planning and their correctional programs, if we leave any time before we're engaging them directly, the gangs will engage them. And what will happen is gangs will fill the void that individuals are looking for. They're looking for somebody to help them, to guide them, etc.
Thank you. Sorry, we're a little over. Mr. Christopherson, your 7 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, guests, for being here today. We appreciate it. Full disclosure, I do have some sense of how difficult your job is, Mr. Head. My first cabinet appointment a very long time ago was corrections in Ontario, and so I do understand the challenges. Having said that, this is still a very troubling report. I'd like to actually begin by just reading a couple of, it'll take me a quick moment to read a couple of quotes coming out of the decision yesterday out of the Superior Court of Justice in Ontario, Brown v. Attorney General of Canada, and it was with regard to the 60s scoop class action. It may have already come across your desk, I'm sure. That judgment says in part, and I quote, is the words of the judge, "In my view, under the first stage of the analysis, a prima facie duty of care is established. It is beyond dispute that there is a special and long-standing historical and constitutional relationship between Canada and Aboriginal peoples that has evolved into a unique and important fiduciary relationship." He further states, "And there can be no doubt that the Aboriginal people's concern to protect and preserve their Aboriginal identity was and remains an interest of the highest importance. As the Divisional Court put it, it is difficult to see a specific interest that could be of more importance to Aboriginal peoples than each person's connection to their Aboriginal heritage." Now, as if that kind of legal framework wouldn't be enough, the legislation that you work under, the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, requires, actually the law that governs your work requires that Corrections Service Canada provide correctional interventions that respond to Indigenous offenders' unique set of needs to support their successful reintegration. So, my first question is, the Auditor General's report, page 13, 3.3.55. We found that access to correctional interventions varied considerably across institutions and regions. We also found that Corrections Service Canada had not examined whether it provided enough access to culturally specific correctional interventions to meet the needs of the Indigenous offender population. Given the legal framework, the legal requirement that you have, how can we have an Auditor General report in front of us that said that your department didn't even examine whether you were providing enough culturally specific interventions? Comments, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the observation. There is no question. We did examine that. Did we provide enough? The answer is no. We did not. Part of the problem. There's several reasons that we could probably go into. One, of course, is the increased number of individuals that are coming into the system, the capacity to keep up with that. The challenges around individuals who, to some extent, particularly with some of the youthful Indigenous offenders that came into the system, who were very much influenced by gangs not to participate in programs. There's all kinds of different factors in play. Did we have programs and interventions in place? Yes, we did. Did we have enough? The answer is obviously not. And are we trying to close that gap? The answer is yes, and trying to do it with obviously within the budget constraints that we have.
Point 3.57. Pardon me. 3.61. We found that CSC did not ensure that its culturally specific correctional programs operated with the required level of elder involvement, and yet in your bring and brag piece, your opening remarks, the top one on the list of what you do is elders, and yet we're finding here that you're not engaging with them. It would seem to me, I'm no expert, but it seems to me that would be a place of important focus, because they're the interface between your system and the cultural environment that you're dealing in. So why the failing grade on working with elders?
Well, what I can talk about there is our engagement with elders. We have about 140 elders that are working in the institutions, working with Aboriginal offenders, Indigenous offenders across the country. Some offenders access the services, others do not. One of the challenges that we have is keeping elders, partly because they are elderly, and we have several forum that we discuss this through the National Aboriginal Advisory Committee, through the National Elders Working Group, to talk about how we can continually recruit elders and find elders in the community that want to come.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. This will happen. A few of us will do this. Cut you off just because we're on short of time. I apologize for being rude, but I want to stay focused on my question. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. You're talking about the load, but I'm talking about the detail of what you did and didn't do. Again, on 3.62, same report, in 1/3 of the offender files we examined, we found that elder reviews had not been documented. I mean, it's a simple matter, but without the documentation, you could argue it didn't happen in terms of the next person dealing with it. So, and then it also says, same paragraph, we also found that Aboriginal liaison officers had not received guidance or training on how to evaluate the impact of elder reviews and interventions on an offender's progress towards successful reintegration. So please stop telling me how wonderful it is and tell me how you're going to correct the findings that are in this report, because this is telling me that you're not doing that great a job with the elders, or at least there's lots of room to do it better.
And if you back, as you described my, I think it was bring and brag report, very clearly we recognize that there are gaps. We're working to encourage more elders to come into the system. We're working to ensure that our Aboriginal liaison officers, you'll see it in our management action plan, to train the ALOs, ACDOs to do that. One of the challenges we had with the elders, again, is that in terms of them engaging offenders, they're very good at that. In terms of documenting what they did, this was a challenge. We had to assign staff members to work with the elders to capture what they're doing. So there is no question. I'm not saying that we're perfect. Far from it. And please don't interpret anything I say.
Perfect, sir.
Oh, I'm saying that. So please don't interpret anything I'm saying is that we are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Head. Monsieur Lefebvre. Merci.
Merci, Madame Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
When I first saw the report, was shocked and almost embarrassed to go through it. And what's most embarrassing, or a bit shocking or disturbing, is that if it wouldn't have been for the Auditor General's report, we'd still be dealing with the same stats. Is there someone within CSC that just deals with Indigenous incarceration and basically rehabilitation to and provide services to them. Is there a group that specifically dedicated to this?
So the Senior Deputy Commissioner, Ann Kelly, is responsible for Aboriginal initiatives in...
So there is, so yes.
In CSC, yes.
Now, was there a specific plan before the Auditor General's report came in, other than this 2003 list of programs that we would provide to Indigenous individuals? Was there an action plan to make sure that each Indigenous offender received services that they required?
The short answer is yes. Yes.
Okay.
Were there things that the Auditor General pointed out that we've added to that? The answer is yes.
Now, yes. But, sir, Mr. Head, when you look at this report, it's clearly there's a lot of things lacking in your prior plan. It's and the fact that all of the stuff that we're seeing coming through this, and again, there's so many in this report, and one of which is access to correctional programs. And at 3.50 of his report, Auditor General states, we found that Indigenous offenders started their correctional programs on average of almost 5 months after their admission into custody. And a lot of times this was for, a lot of these offenders were there for short term, so never received any of the programs. And from what we also saw in the report, the ones that do receive access to these programs are less likely to reoffend once they go. Isn't that the whole purpose of these programs? That when they are provided to go back into the public, that they are less likely to reoffend because they've received the proper services?
Again, the short answer is yes. Our whole strategy going forward here is to, now with Aboriginal offenders, is to have them start their programs at the time of intake.
So, but
as soon as
I
they
guess
come
what
in
I'm
the
saying
door.
is, why wasn't that, I guess, a priority back in from 2003, well, forever, right? I guess, like, why did it now become a priority now that the Auditor General raised it? Wouldn't that your plan have addressed that? What I'm going at here is, there's a systemic issue within the CSC from what I can read through this, and that now that we have the Auditor General report, we'll deal with it, and that's extremely disturbing for us, for me anyways. I'll talk about myself, to see that now that they're saying, well, now we will deal with it because now we see, but then you're telling me that you have a specific group dealing with this, and that obviously they weren't doing their jobs properly, or maybe not to. What I'm getting at is, what was missing? Why was there that lack?
I think, again, primarily because the focus was trying to address a long list of program needs for offenders while they were incarcerated, as opposed to identifying the main program, the key program, and activating that as soon as possible. There is no question there was a gap. That gap has been identified. We have a plan going forward to close that gap. And we will now be, like I say, for Aboriginal offenders, be taking an approach where we will be presuming that their security level is reduced when they complete the program.
Well, one thing I can tell you, Mr. Head, that this committee has taken upon itself to bring back certain reports or certain departments that deal with these reports, and I will make the recommendation that this is brought back, that we follow this, because it's the fact that we have individuals that have that supposedly within the services that we offer, they are offered there, but we're not doing a very good job of ensuring that these programs are followed and that they have access, because there's huge wait times. There's basically the ones that don't even get the services. So there's a lot. Again, there's a systemic problem here, and be rest assured that we'll be asking to follow up as to how we are improving the services on a go-forward basis.
So, and just along those lines, Madam Chair, I'd be glad to share our plan with our timeframes, be glad to provide progress reports, be glad to reappear to show that we're taking this serious.
I appreciate that, and we will hold you to that. Thank you.
We'll definitely follow up on it. Thank you very much. Mr. Nater, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses as well. I'd like to start a little bit drilling down a little bit deeper into the criminal risk index, which my colleague Mr. Genereux spoke about earlier. Could you provide some specific examples or some of the criterion that might be used in developing this index? What might be some of the factors would increase the index or decrease the index in a specific case? Could you provide a couple examples of exactly what would be?
I'll actually turn to Madam Kelly to give you some insight into that.
Again, I don't have the specifics, but what we were using before, and it was explained previously, was the custody rating scale. And the custody rating scale is a security classification tool. And through research, what we found is that there was, again, a better tool, and that's the criminal risk index that's been developed. And the criminal risk index is actually to determine the program intensity level that should be offered to the offender, because we have high intensity programs, moderate intensity programs. So that's what it determines.
Okay, when you say you don't have the specifics, do you mean you don't have the specifics today, or they
haven't
been?
On the tool, yes.
Sorry.
That's right, I don't have.
But is that something you could provide?
Absolutely.
The committee? Okay, I would appreciate that. Is this also something?
Sorry, just on that. What we can actually do, if it's helpful to the committee, is actually provide you a copy of the two tools so that you can actually see the criteria that was being assessed.
That'd be appreciated. Thank you. Following up on that, is this an assessment that would be carried out throughout the individual's incarceration? Would this be updated as it go along? And would it be something that would be play a factor into a parole consideration towards the end of incarceration as well?
Well, we're talking still about the criminal risk index.
Yes.
Again, it's to determine the program intensity level. So that's done actually during the intake process. So what we do is we determine the needs of the offenders and which program they should. Well, we have one program now, the Integrated Correctional Program Model, specifically designed for Aboriginal offenders. And the criminal risk index determines whether they are going to follow the moderate or the high intensity program. And that's done at intake, so when they first arrive into custody.
Now in your action plan, you've talked about centralizing the intake process, the intake analysis. Do you mean centralized from a national perspective, centralized within institutions, centralized within a region? What were you talking about in terms of that centralization?
So what we're going to be doing is in specific institutions across the country, having centralized intake units that will specialize in doing the assessments, the planning, and initiating the interventions for Aboriginal offenders, Indigenous offenders. So this way we're going to, rather than spread our resources across 43 institutions, we're going to target institutions in each of our 5 regions and a couple of extra ones in the Prairie region that will specialize. So we'll have staff members that will be specialized in assessments, correctional planning, and initiating the programs.
Now, throughout your action plan as well, you've suggested adding indicators to the offender management system, the OMS. If memory serves, this is a rather dated database. I believe there's a renewal in 2001 to 2006, but a significantly dated system. Are there any concerns about using this system as a work mule, adding too much to the system, that you might have a challenge with the management of this system?
We're going to, there's 2 things that are happening. One, we're going to be able to make the adjustments that we've committed to in the existing system, but I've actually just commissioned a team to look at how we go to a whole new generation of OMS that uses a more modern platform.
Now, in terms of the Commissioner's directives that you've suggested you may be introducing in the action plan, have you issued any final Commissioner's directives in light of this report yet? And if so, can they be shared with the committee?
Yes, most definitely. There's a couple that have already been modified and promulgated, and there are some others that are still in the work over the next couple of months. And we can provide you the ones that are already complete and the list of the ones that are proceeding and where they are in relation to our action plan.
Now, in terms of the timelines you've identified in the action plan, in 10 seconds or less, in terms of the timelines identified, is the Correctional Service on track to meet the timelines identified? And if so, which ones might, and if not, which ones might be slipping?
At this point in time, they're all on track. I have both my policy sector and my audit sector monitoring our commitments to make sure there is no slippage.
Thank you very much. Mr. Area, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Kelly, I have a question. It may be an unfair question, and if you don't answer it, that's fine. Indigenous population is just 3%. They constitute 26% of the total offenders, and women account for close to 37%. Why this?
One reason is, as was said in the Commissioner's opening remarks, is we do not control the number of admissions.
Understand, but with your background dealing with this Indigenous offenders, you may have some insight why this is so?
Again, because the warrant of committal admissions are 24%, which is quite high. So we can't control the admissions. What we can control, though, is preparing the offenders for release.
Thanks. Let me go to my second question. Mr. Head, you said that your organization cannot do this alone. I mean to say the successful reintegration, and you want to work with your partners. How is it going? How is your relationship with all the institutions that are involved in the successful reintegration? What are the problems? What are the challenges? Where do you find the issues?
A very good question. One of the things that we are focusing on, and I've had several conversations with National Chief Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations, is looking at how once an Aboriginal offender is released into the community, how do we help keep them out there? So the 4 key things to success are employment, housing, the necessary health care that's required, and pro-social family and friend support. I've been talking to the National Chief about some of the things that he can do for us in terms of opening the doors to talk to various regional First Nations councils, to various band councils around the issues specifically around employment. How can we create some employment opportunities specifically for Indigenous offenders?
What are the problems or challenges you are finding with other partner organizations?
Part of the challenge is that the services are not necessarily in the location where individuals want to be released to. So, for example, if individuals want to be released back into their home community, which may be back onto the reserve, some of the supporting agencies and services are not there. Individuals who are looking to be released into an urban setting that they did not come from, the challenges are getting them hooked up with the services that are there, and in some cases, some of those services are already overtaxed.
Mr. Shen, you want to?
Thank you. I have to say, when I read this report, there was one word that came to my mind, and it hasn't been said today, so I do have to say it. That word is crisis. This, to me, is a huge crisis. When you look at the numbers, as has been pointed out, Indigenous men and women represent 3% of the adult population in our country, yet they represent 26% of offenders in federal custody. And what's worse is that they're not given timely access to rehabilitation programs. There's uneven access, and beyond that, across the regions, there's inconsistency. So I've heard about the types of programs you provide, and my sense is that it's not that we don't know what to do, it's that we have to actually do it. And I heard you say, Mr. Head, that the work you do can affect the length of time someone is in custody, it can affect the security level of the institution, it can affect the time of case processing, and you made it very clear, as did your colleague Ms. Kelly just now, that correctional services cannot control the number of Indigenous Canadians receiving federal sentences of incarceration. I find that type of statement very bothersome. I understand from a technical perspective how that might be true, but the mere fact that Indigenous offenders tend to be youth, they tend to be repeat offenders, the work that you do isn't just about reintegration into the community, it's also about rehabilitation. And the things that they could go through the programs and services that you ought to be providing that are culturally relevant can have a very significant impact. And yes, it can control the number of Indigenous Canadians that are receiving federal sentences. That is my opinion. You've stated that several times. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, 5 seconds?
Yeah, just very quickly, no question. There's some challenges there. 74% of Aboriginal offenders that come into the federal system are coming into the federal system for the first time. They've gone through the youth system and the provincial system between 4 to 6 times. So we're only getting them for the first time. Sometimes the sentence that we get to work with is very short, and if you look at the eligibility dates that exist, we would have to, for that 2 to 3 year sentence, we literally got to get them in, assessed, programmed in the first 4 months in order to get a report to the parole board by the 4th month so that they can make a decision for day parole eligibility by the 6th month on a 3-year sentence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Head. And very quickly, Mr. General, I'm sorry, I'll have to give you the last 3 minutes
Okay.
for the next hour.
Thank you. Quickly, would like do you discuss the current training that's currently provided for frontline correctional officers and what you think the impact would be on the resource level for further increasing the training? And this pertains to recommendation 3.106, where it suggests further training for correctional service staff for Aboriginal social history factors. And the department's response, it states that the CSC will build on existing training initiatives and continue to integrate Aboriginal social history considerations into the case management training and practices. If you would mind commenting.
Yes, so specifically the Aboriginal social history training is for the parole officers and the program officers, not necessarily the frontline correctional officers. So they're the ones that do the assessments and the reports that go forward to the parole board. So we have an allotted number of days each year for what we call parole officer continuous development training, and we're able to use the 5 days that are allotted each year to build in the short version of what we call ASH, ASH training, Aboriginal Social History training. We're able to build that in as part of the ongoing training. We've also, in terms of new parole officers, have built it into the parole officer induction training. So all new parole officers will be receiving that training.
And this is new since the Auditor General's report?
It's due within the last year, and okay. We've gone out. Ms. Kelly and her team have gone out in the last number of months to ensure that all our regional management committees and various staff groups understand the Aboriginal social history and how to use it and incorporate it into recommendations and decision making.
So essentially, your answer is that there would be no impact because you're already doing it. Mr. Ferguson, are you satisfied with what they've done in terms of the training initiatives?
It will be the last question.
I got a minute left, don't I? You said 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Self-timing over here.
I can't comment sort of on what they've done. We haven't gone back and audited that. Certainly, I mean, we were concerned, very concerned with the what we found on a number of these things. But I do want to say that there were also some things that we were encouraged by in the course of the audit. One was that the department did a very good job of consulting with First Nations on some of these issues about what type of programming that they should put in place. And the response that we got from the Commissioner at the end of the audit, I think, was one that was clearly their recognition that they needed to do better. So I think that's not taking away from the issues that we've seen here and the seriousness of what needs to be done. So I can't comment specifically on whether they've done it and to what degree they've done it. I'm glad that the committee is going to consider having them back. But I am encouraged by what I believe is the sincerity of the organization to deal with the issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your presence. We have to change groups now, so we will suspend for 2 minutes while we change the groups. Thank you.
We are back in session. Good afternoon.
General and Mr. Berthollet, who's the principal in this study. We have from, I'm sorry, trying to find my English version. Yeah, thank you. We have from the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development, we have Mr. Joe Wild, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, and we have Mr. Stephen Gagnon, Director General, Specific Claims Branch. We are going to be looking at the Report 6, on First Nations specific claims of the fall 2016 reports of the Auditor General of Canada. And so, yes, Mr. Christopherson, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My point of order is to seek to determine whether we've got a big issue or not. If you'll allow me just a moment's indulgence, page 12. This question to you, Auditor General. On page 12 of your report, in 6.44, two-thirds of the way through, you say in your report regarding some information and study you're doing, the department did not respond to requests to provide evidence of further collaboration, and then on and on. My concern, Madam Chair, is the did not respond to requests. Entities not responding to requests from the Auditor General when they're in the midst of doing an audit, we take very seriously. Was this a big issue, sir, or was this like if they don't respond, it's their loss because they don't get a chance to make their case, or was this an actual case where you asked for information and they just bald-faced ignored you?
If I may, Mr. Christopherson, this is about the relationship between the Department and the Assembly of First Nations. I don't think it has anything to do with the Auditor General.
Okay, well, let me hear that clarification, because I read it differently. It looked to me like it was not to the Auditor General.
Madam McLeod, on this point of order?
On this point of order, Madam Chair, I don't believe that you can ask witnesses to clarify a point of order. I might be wrong, but I think a point of order is not an engagement with a witness.
Well, the question is about their report. I can do it in my questioning, but it seemed to me macro enough that I could ask it at the beginning.
That's what the clerk is telling me, that you have to reserve that for a question. I'm sorry, I'm not experienced enough in this seat.
No, that's fine. That's fine. If that's your ruling, I'll abide by it.
That's what I'm being told.
Fair enough. They know it's coming now. I can speak in short form. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ferguson, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for your introductory statement.
Madame la Présidente, je vous remercie.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving this opportunity to present the results of our audit on First Nation specific claims. Joining me at the table is Jerome Berthollet, Assistant Auditor General, who was responsible for the audit. The federal government has long acknowledged that it has not always met its obligations to First Nations under historic treaties or properly managed First Nations funds or other assets. In 2007, the government committed to a new process called Justice at Last, which was aimed at resolving long-standing grievances more quickly, fairly, and transparently, preferably through negotiations. Resolving specific claims would provide justice for First Nations and certainty for government, industry, and all Canadians. Our audit examined whether Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada the department primarily responsible for implementing the new process, adequately managed the resolution of First Nations specific claims. The audit focused on whether First Nations had adequate access to the specific claims process, whether claims were resolved and documented in line with selected aims of justice at last, and the results of specific claims process were reported publicly and completely. We interviewed officials in the Department of Justice Canada, the Specific Claims Tribunal, several First Nations, and organizations representing First Nations to get their perspectives on how well the new process was working. However, we did not audit the performance of these organizations.
Northern Affairs Canada did not adequately manage the resolution of First Nation-specific claims as envisioned under the new process. For example, more claims were to be resolved than received each year. We found that the Department achieved this objective in only 2 of the 8 years since Justice at Last came into force. Furthermore, the Department had stated that every reasonable effort would be made to achieve negotiated settlements and that the vast majority of claims that entered negotiation would likely be resolved by a settlement agreement. However, we found that among the claims that entered the negotiation process, more claims were either closed by the Department or ended up in litigation than were resolved through negotiation. We also found that the Department's reforms of the specific claims process were not developed in consultation with First Nations and that the reforms introduced barriers that hindered First Nations access to the process and impeded the resolution of claims. These barriers included certain practices that did not encourage negotiations, such as take it or leave it offers for claims that the Department deemed to be valued at under $3 million, significant unilateral cuts in funding to First Nations claimants for claims preparation and negotiation, and very limited use of mediation services and information sharing between the Department and First Nations. The Department also did not use available information and feedback to improve implementation of the specific claims process. This information included concerns raised by First Nations and organizations representing First Nations about how the Department was implementing the new process. It also included information and feedback from the Specific Claims Tribunal decisions, most of which were in favor of First Nations. Pour ce qui est de la publication de...
With respect to public reporting, we found that the Department's public reports were incomplete and did not contain the information needed to understand the actual results of the specific claims process. For example, the Department publicly reported that the 2007 reforms were a success. However, we found that most of the settled claims used to support this assertion were already either resolved or almost resolved before Justice at Last was implemented.
In public accounts, the government has acknowledged a liability totaling at least $4.5 billion for approximately 500 specific claims where the Department has assessed an outstanding lawful obligation for the Crown. We are pleased that the Department has agreed with all 10 of our recommendations and is preparing an implementation action plan. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Wild, I invite you to present, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the invitation to appear today. So I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Treaties and Aboriginal Government. I'm responsible for the specific claims process. With me is Stephen Gagnon, who is the Director General of the branch in my sector that is responsible specifically for specific claims. Permettez-moi de vous rappeler brièvement en quoi consiste.
I would like to tell you briefly what specific claims are and why they are important to First Nations and Canadians in general.
First Nations against the federal government arising from the way Canada administered lands and other First Nation assets. Specific claims also relate to how some of the provisions of pre-1975 treaties have been implemented. Canada is committed to resolving these historic wrongs through negotiated settlement agreements rather than in the courts whenever possible. Doing so is one of the many ways Canada is building trust and reconciliation between the Crown and First Nations. The specific claims process is a non-litigious alternative dispute resolution process in which First Nations may choose to participate. Continuing to participate in a voluntary and transparent process to resolve specific claims is beneficial to all Canadians. It allows for mutually agreed upon settlements, provides clarity in terms of land ownership, and is faster and less expensive than litigation. The government is committed to working with First Nations to find practical and fair ways to improve the specific claims process. We will continue to work with First Nations to find ways to improve the time taken to resolve claims, to reduce the costs associated with the process, and to ensure that First Nations have fair and reasonable access to the process. Our objectives remain to negotiate fair and reasonable settlements. The audit findings and recommendations have reinforced the need to find ways to improve the process. The Auditor General tabled his findings on First Nation specific claims on November 29, 2016. The report found that the process reforms initiated in 2007 unintentionally created barriers to First Nations access to the specific claims process, which in turn are impeding the resolution of claims. Les 10 recommandations faites par le vérificateur.
The 10 recommendations made by the Auditor General focus on better communication with First Nations in order to identify jointly ways to improve the specific claims process. Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada agrees with the recommendations made by the Auditor General. In fact, the audit is not the only recent report to identify aspects of the specific claims process that can be improved.
Review of the Specific Claims Tribunal Act and are noted in the Minister's report tabled in Parliament last November. Indeed, in June 2016, before the audit was concluded, INAC had started working with the Assembly of First Nations, First Nation organizations, and others to identify fair and practical measures to make the specific claims process more responsive and effective. INAC has re-engaged with the Assembly of First Nations, has provided $400,000 in funding this fiscal year to facilitate discussions on the 4 key priority issues the AFN identified. A joint technical working group co-chaired by INAC and the Assembly of First Nations is currently overseeing work being done collaboratively to address these 4 priority issues: funding to support the research and development of specific claims, the process for resolving claims with a value greater than $150 million, the better use of mediation in negotiation processes, and clear public reporting. Each of these issues features in the report of the Auditor General, and the recommendations resulting from the collaborative efforts of the Joint Technical Working Group will inform the Department's reporting and the detailed action plan to implement those recommendations. Le Ministère des Affaires autochtones du Nord Canada.
ENAC has been mandated to renew the relationship between the Crown and First Nations people in Canada based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Addressing the Auditor General's recommendations will be a significant example of how Canada will
Le Ministère des Affaires
Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada is committed to improving the specific claims process by working with First Nations and First Nation organizations as an integral part of fulfilling our mandate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wild. And now we go to you, Mr. Lefebvre, for 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wild, I notice here you're the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister. Can you tell us why the Deputy Minister is not here?
No, I cannot tell you that. I don't know.
Usually at these sessions, Madam Chair, we always have the presence of the Deputy Minister.
I didn't have a discussion with the Deputy Minister as to whether or not there were issues vis-a-vis her availability. My assumption would be that there was a scheduling conflict that she couldn't address in order to be here.
That's not going to cut it.
Yeah, we will definitely take this up with the Deputy Minister. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your remarks, Mr. Wild, you mentioned that In the report, the Auditor General's report found that the process reforms initiated in 2007 unintentionally created barriers to First Nations access to the specific claim process, which in turn are impeding the resolution of claims. Obviously, now that the Auditor General came up with 10 recommendations, but can you tell us in what way did these barriers impede on the resolution? Can you maybe expand more on that, please?
Thank you. I can do that. Thank you for the question. I give you a couple of examples, and I don't mean to try and interpret what the Auditor General may or may not have met, but my understanding from the discussions I've had with First Nation groups was there was a funding cut to the research funding back in 2012, I believe. So the argument was if First Nations couldn't research claims, they couldn't submit them, and therefore they couldn't have them dealt with. Another example of that, I would say, is we were trying to find a way to deal more expeditiously with the smaller value claims. In other words, we would define those, and I think the Auditor General made a reference, under $3 million. The point being that you try not to spend a ton of time and money on a claim that would not be worth the amount of money that would come out of it. And so the practice was that we would send a letter of offer out to the First Nation, very little communication happening between the First Nation and the department, with a fairly tight deadline to get back to us, in which case the offer would have been withdrawn.
And how long would that deadline have been? Like if you issue a letter and say, get back to us in?
On smaller ones, it'd be like 3 months or something like that, 3 to 6 months. But I think 3 months was for the very small ones, the general timeline.
And who, I guess, why was why was there such a short time frame?
Well, to give you a bit of background context, so the reforms in 2007 were responding to long-standing criticisms of how long it was taking us to research claims and how long it was taking us to resolve claims. So our branch put a premium on trying to get the work done quickly so that we could show that we were making progress and that we weren't just in processes that weren't going to produce a result.
And how often did the First Nations accept your short-term offer?
I don't have a number of
Is it 9 out of 10? Is it 90%? Is it 50%? Is it 20%? Is it 0?
It's not 0. We do have a number of claims that were resolved, but I can tell you the large number of claims where they're suspended are the smaller value ones. Since typically when they get closed, it's because we haven't gotten a response. I can't give you an actual reason. I can't speak for the First Nations, but your assumption may be that they just said, well, this isn't negotiation, so we're not negotiating with you.
Exactly.
So there was a specific claims tribunal case in 2014 where the issue of how that approach on small value claims was dealt with, and the judge told us that effectively that wasn't negotiation, so we have changed the practice in response to that.
Can one of you, Mr. Wild, Mr. Gagnon, tell me the budget that was allocated to deal with these from 2007 to basically 2000, at the time of this audit, 2013, 15, did the budget change to deal with the specific claims?
Are you sorry?
Sorry, I'm asking what the budget was. I guess I'll make it more specific.
Operational budget, or
yes, to deal with this. Yes, operational.
Well,
budget.
there was a fund created at the time. I think it was 1.35 billion or 2.5 billion. That was the amount to settle claims going. That was the amount available to settle claims with First Nations.
Sorry, that was to settle claims. I'm talking about operations.
Yes, there was time-limited funding to increase operations to get through what was considered a large backlog of files in assessment. I think there were about 540 of those at the time, and to negotiate more expeditiously.
Okay. Also in the Auditor General's report, the Specific Claims Tribunal overturned 12 out of 14 of the department's decisions to not accept a specific claim because the claim was not found to disclose an outstanding lawful obligation. So that was kind of the reasons why you were asking then just the Specific Claims Tribunal just to overturn it quickly. Why was 12 out of these 14 decisions were overturned?
So, I mean, each is case specific, of course, but I think what
But that's a very high number, 12 out of 14.
It is, and what it speaks to is that the way in which lawful obligation is being assessed and interpreted is too narrow and too conservative. And I think that's what we're learning from the tribunal decisions, is that there are areas where, the best example I can think of would be the decision in Beardy's, where our approach had been that if a claim looked like it was speaking to an individual benefit, the payment of an annuity, versus something that was vis-a-vis the First Nation as a whole, we had no authority or mandate to deal with that. And in Beardy's, the tribunal clarified that annuity payments were in fact a benefit held by the collective. They just happened to be implemented by way of individual payments. That then caused us to have to go back and look at and think about, okay, we need to review all the cases where we've dealt with annuities and reopen those that we closed.
I'm going to close at the time. Now, if you can explain to the committee how many, 1 minute?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. How many of the claims that were sent to the tribunal have since been resolved?
Sorry, how many decisions have we got from the tribunal?
Yeah, that have been resolved.
I think there are about 20 decisions from the tribunal. If you're saying the actual decisions, yeah, about 20, 21, I think.
Over how, again, and what is the time frame that we're looking at here? 20 decisions in the past?
I think the statute came into effect in 2009. It took some time to get the rules created and whatnot, so it's, I would say, maybe the last 7 years.
In 7 years, we have 20 decisions?
From the tribunal, I think so. I could verify that, but I think that's about right.
Wow.
Merci, Monsieur Lefebvre. Ms. McLeod, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both all the witnesses that are here today. I know that this particular audit chose not to look at the tribunal and, of course, the independence of your office, but we certainly had Justice Slade at our committee, our Indigenous Affairs Committee, and he indicated that there is significant challenges in terms of manpower for the tribunal. And so I guess my comment being, because they have to take the judges from the Superior Court, and we have a lack of judges appointments period right now, could you perhaps comment in terms of the challenges of having a pool of judges that are able to be on the tribunal? And I guess Mr. Wild, and then of course our Mr. Ferguson, if you had any comments, even though it wasn't directly the focus of your audit.
So given that the tribunal is an independent tribunal, we're not involved in the decision-making around the number of appointments or the appointments themselves. So I actually don't have a comment on that I can make on whether or not there's a sufficient number of judges at the tribunal at present. We have heard the concern. I mean, the concern has been made public from various quarters, but I don't have an authority or a role in the actual appointment of the justices.
Mr. Ferguson?
We actually touched on this issue in an audit that we had done on governor and council appointments. It was one where we noted that the tribunal said that they didn't have enough members on the tribunal to make the decisions. In that, we actually felt that the department needed to perhaps take a stronger interest, I guess, in the issue and work with the Department of Justice in terms of, identifying, what would be needed. We understand that the department wouldn't be involved in the appointment process or anything like that. But fundamentally, we felt that there needed to be some way of addressing this issue of, identifying, the number of positions that were needed, and that could be taken into account in the appointment of judges or that type of thing. So obviously, I believe the issue was more with the Department of Justice in terms of the actual appointments. I believe that was the case. But we did feel that the Department of Indigenous Affairs could take a role in helping to understand whether there are enough members on that tribunal, and I guess sort of convince the Department of Justice about moving forward to get those members appointed.
Thank you. So I think it would be reasonable to say that as we continue to have a real sort of lack of judicial appointments, it's going to filter down in terms of the specific claims tribunal being able to do its very important work and to get to resolution in terms of claims. So my next question, I mean, it's pretty low-hanging fruit, I think, when you have an auditor's report come out. I recognize that there are some complex issues that you have indicated you're going to tackle, but I mean, there was two, I believe, that were related to the website, and I find it actually kind of amazing. To me, those are like, we should get this done. It can be done within a month or two. It's not something that should take 8 months, a year to actually accomplish. I believe it was 680 and 647. So why does it take so long to deal with some of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of having a website that's reflecting what's happening?
Thank you for the question. I think part of the issue isn't just what the website reflects, it's that the Auditor General has commented, and First Nations have certainly noted that they don't like the way we've styled some of the information. So part of the work that we're doing with the Assembly of First Nation and others is to work on the kind of information that would be shared so that we have a common understanding of what we're reporting and what it means, because they would argue that what we're reporting makes it look like there's more progress than there actually has been, and so we're trying to come to some kind of term. Again, a partly bureaucratic answer, we're revising the overall website content in any event, and so that's been caught up in that a little bit, but we are trying to work on that.
So certainly from my perspective, if it takes a year plus to even come to an agreement around websites, we have significant long-time challenges to actually get to the pieces that are going to matter, because again, that to me should be a quick conversation, low-hanging fruit. So which leads me to the working group. I think you have looked at your joint working group as your mechanism for dealing with these issues. Can you tell me who's on the working group? How often do you meet? What progress have you made?
Well, I sit on the Joint Technical Working Group, and the Assembly of First Nation coordinates the First Nation and other participations.
So who currently sitting on it?
Well, there's representatives from the Assembly of First Nation, the UBCIC, Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, the First Nation, FSIN, Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, Indigenous Nations, I should say. Sorry, they've changed their name. So there's a group of researchers, a group of practitioners, and a group of people from the political organizations that are for the First Nation side. They've got council, we have council. We're in the process of identifying and have had a few subcommittee meetings where, of the 4 areas that we're working on, we're meeting in smaller groups to make recommendations to the committee that I sit on with my counterpart at the FN. So, and we've had, I think, 3 meetings at the Joint Technical Working Group, so the more senior one, and a number of subgroup meetings. To be fair, at this point, we've largely focused on process going forward, so there hasn't been a lot of forward momentum, even on the kinds of things you might have characterized as low-hanging fruit. But we are, we think, making some progress. And you've alluded to it a little bit in one of your earlier comments. There was we're working from trying to build some trust. The relationship between ourselves and First Nations, some of the stuff wasn't all that great, and so we're trying to rebuild that currently.
Thank you very much. Mr. Christopherson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for attendance today. I'd like to take just a moment while we've got the opportunity to be televised to revisit very briefly, Chair. And by the way, the question I asked earlier, if the Auditor General feels that it's important enough to comment on, fine. I only get one shot at this, so I'm going to get my stuff out and then leave some time, I hope. I want to refer to the last status report of the Auditor General of Canada from Sheila Fraser when she departed, and she said this, heading up conditions on First Nations reserves. But it speaks to attitude and approach. Between 2001 and spring 2010, my reports included 16 chapters addressing First Nations and Inuit issues directly. Another 15 chapters dealt with the issues of importance to Aboriginal people. I am profoundly disappointed to note in Chapter 4 of this status report that despite federal action in response to our recommendations over the years, a disproportionate number of First Nations people still lack the most basic services that other Canadians take for granted. On the surface, it may appear that the government simply needs to work harder to make existing programs work better. However, after 10 years in this job, it has become clear to me that if First Nations communities on reserves are going to see meaningful progress in their well-being, a fundamental change is needed. In a country as rich as Canada, this disparity is unacceptable. Mr. Ferguson issued his report, an interim report, halfway through his 10-year term, and this is Mr. Ferguson's words to us last fall. Quote, "Another picture that reappears too frequently is the disparity in the treatment of Canada's Indigenous peoples. My predecessor, Sheila Fraser, near the end of her mandate, summed up her impression of 10 years of audits and related recommendations on First Nations issues with the word unacceptable. Since my arrival, we have continued to audit these issues and to present at least one report per year on areas that have an impact on First Nations, including emergency management and policing services on reserves, access to health care, and most recently, correctional services for Aboriginal offenders. When you add the results of these audits to those we reported on in the past, I can only describe the situation as it now exists as beyond unacceptable. There's now a decade's worth of audits showing that programs have failed to effectively serve Canada's Indigenous peoples. Until a problem-solving mindset is brought to issues to develop solutions built around people, instead of defaulting to litigation, arguments about money, and process roadblocks, this country will continue to squander the potential and lives of much of its Indigenous population." End quote. Now, to the report that's in front of us, I'm just going to read some highlights because my question to Mr. Wild is going to be, how have things changed? And my specific concern is the attitude. The attitude of some of the decisions that are made here is very troubling. I was very angry by the time I was done this report. I probably won't get through them all. I'm going on again. But from the report, page 11, and these are snippets of different issues, but these are summaries from the Auditor General. In 2011, without input from First Nations, the Department developed a separate process to expedite the negotiation of small value claims. In our view, the following characteristics of this new process introduced barriers to negotiations that were inconsistent with justice at last. That was no input from First Nations. We noted annual funding to First Nations for claims research decreased by 40% from $7.8 million in 13-14 fiscal year to $4.7 in the 14-15 fiscal year. According to department officials, this funding decrease was undertaken as part of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan. We found that the absence of methodology resulted in funding cuts were arbitrary and unevenly distributed. And another one, for example, we found that the department arbitrarily set the maximum amount of a loan that could be provided to a First Nation of $142,500 per year or $427,500 over 3 years. Then we found a departmental study that suggested annual funding of $240,000 for a First Nation to negotiate a specific claim. I mean, it's insulting. After 2008, another issue, after 2008, Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada no longer shared this particular report with First Nations before sending it to the Department of Justice Canada. Consequently, after Justice at Last came into effect, First Nations were not made aware of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada's analysis and interpretation of the claim submission. It is our view that this awareness is necessary to understand the factual basis for a legal opinion and help. Again, that attitude. Incomplete reporting. I'm on page 18. We found that some results were either not reported publicly or not reported clearly. The department's public report of results were incomplete and masked actual outcomes. In our view, parliamentarians and Canadians would therefore have difficulty understanding the real results of Justice at Last. And there's more and more. I'm running out of time. In our view, another one, parliamentarians and Canadians have received an incomplete view of how long it takes for a claim to be processed. Help me understand. Every time we hear this is the moment there's going to be change, and there's never change. Mr. Wild, give me some reason why me and my colleagues on this committee should believe that this time it's going to be different.
So we are committed to the process that we've been jointly designing with the Assembly of First Nations and other First Nation organizations to working together to ameliorate the process. We know there are problems. We know there's a lot of problems. We know that you know, I don't think it was malintentioned, and I just want to be fair to the public servants that work in the department and worked on this file over the past decades. I don't think it was malintentioned. I think that in the balancing act of trying to figure out how to move forward a large volume, mistakes have been made in terms of then doing that in a way in which you're actually engaged in a process that has at its heart reconciliation. I think the government is clearly committed to moving forward in that spirit of reconciliation. I think that we are committed to jointly designing policy and processes that enable us to move forward. And that's what this action plan reflects. And that's the commitment that we have, is to work together with the Assembly of First Nations and other First Nation organizations to design a process that will better meet the interests of all parties, which is getting to negotiated settlements.
Thank you very much. Madam Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here with us. When I was reading the report, and in the first few pages by 6.7, the description of this Justice at Last program, I was a glimmer of hope, you know, something that was on the right track as to how to, because we know that there are claims across this country, and I think each one of us in our ridings are affected by claims that have been simmering for decades, and if not till, of course, from the beginning of our confederation. The idea that we had a plan that would not only address the backlog of claims and their slow resolution, settle the specific claims, and compensate First Nations for past damages associated with Canada's outstanding lawful obligations. And then in 6.8, in return for this compensation, that we had an agreement from First Nations to never reopen these claims. This seemed to be something that was really to get us back on track. So what happened? What happened with that plan? What we saw is what we saw in the Auditor General's report was that there were obstacles that were put up. These take it or leave it offers for claims that were done with very little interaction with the First Nations. Significant unilateral cuts in funding to the First Nation claimants for claims preparation and negotiation, and then very little use of mediation and negotiation, the very tool that I would think had gone into the Justice at Last programming, that we didn't use the mediation, and in fact fell back onto having to use the justice system, which already was problematic and expensive to use. Why did we not use mediation right from the get-go?
I don't have an explanation as to why mediation wasn't used more frequently. I can, put forward, I guess, a host of different issues that I think were there, but I think it fundamentally comes down to whether or not the government at the time saw that as a viable tool for resolving claims. I mean, Justice at Last did...
Could you just repeat that for us,
sure.
Mr. Wild? So we had this program, Justice at Last, that was specifically set up to use mediation, but maybe there was a political decision?
I'm not saying that necessarily there was a political decision. I'm saying that I think there has been, and I'm not going to, again, I'm not trying to promote this as an excuse, so I just want to be clear about that. I'm not sure that the kind of culture of the government was ready for what it would mean to go down the path of using mediation. And I think that's been a sticky point. And there's a long learning curve in that it's not a tool that, within the public service, people are necessarily comfortable with when you're talking about claims that have at their core compensation. So I think we are trying to find a way as to how we can get more comfortable using mediation, and there is work being done around looking at what we need to do to train public servants so that they better understand how to use the tool.
Okay.
But that is, like, you know, there's a, the best way I can put it, I guess, is that I think there's a culture change issue there that we have to kind of unpack and get our hands wrapped around. And again, like, I'm not trying to put that out there as an excuse. I think it's taking us time to get there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying. I'd like to go to Mr. Ferguson then, and just to give us an idea, because part of our function here, of course, is to review how the public monies are spent. Mr. Ferguson, could we have a quantifiable estimate of how much time and money would have been saved if the INAC was using more of a mediation approach, as was originally intended?
Certainly, I wouldn't be able to put any estimate on that. You'd have to be able to identify exactly how many of these cases would go to mediation. But I think, you know, one thing that I do want to point out is what we were concerned about on the mediation was how the department implemented it. Because, you know, as we say in the audit, they set the mediation service up within the department. So almost by definition, the First Nations weren't going to see it as an independent way to resolve those types of differences of opinion, right? So certainly...
Mr. Ferguson, I'm sorry, 2 seconds. The bells have started ringing. I just have to ask my colleagues if they allow us to continue until 5:30. Was everybody agreed that we continue until 5:30? Thank you very much. So that was our concern. Was you know, again, we felt that by setting it up, the mediation service up within the department, you know, whether it was actually independent or not, the First Nations weren't going to perceive the mediation service as independent.
Okay, very interesting. How much time?
Minute and a half.
Okay, I give to my colleague, TJ.
Just a quick question. You know, I always believe that you can't evaluate what you don't measure. And in paragraph 6.56 of the Auditor General's report, it says, we found that Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada had a process to consider impacts decisions from specific claims tribunal, but was unable to provide us with the evidence that had a formal process to identify improvements and make required changes. We found no evidence that the department improved the specific claims process by using formal feedback from internal and external parties on specific claims process or information regarding First Nations concerns about this process. And then if you go to the recommendations, so it clearly lays out what the recommendation is, but it says expected final date of completion ongoing. And my concern with that is that, like, this has been ongoing since 1948, and we're still not gathering the appropriate information. Yeah. So if we haven't gathered it in the last 3/4 of a century, what are the odds that we're going to gather it in the next 12 to 15 months? And it says in key interim milestone of fall 2017. And I love these recommendation reports, and Mr. Christofferson knows that I love my dates, and I like firm dates like October 31st or December the 1st, definitive times when we're going to have, you know, some key measurable objectives where we're going to get to. And I just wanted to know if you wanted to reflect on that, and, you know, what you think the appropriate timeline is to start gathering the information that's needed to move forward.
Mr. Harvey, 30 seconds, please, for an answer.
I thought he was asking you. Or are you asking the Auditor General?
Well, I don't. Sorry. Do you want the Auditor General to put a timeline together for you, or do you think that's something the department should do?
I'm sorry. I didn't understand the end of the question. That's all. If you're asking about, and just to make sure that I'm following which one you're talking about, are you talking about recommendation 6.66?
Yes, which is a direct reference to paragraph 6.56.
Right.
Right.
So,
one is what they found, and one is the recommendation based off of it.
Right. So, I mean, the reason that is noted is as ongoing is because that's going to be a continuous process of discussion and dialogue with the Assembly of First Nations. So we'll be making improvements, and then we'll continue to have dialogue with them about what further things they think we're going to need to improve in the future.
Okay, so well, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that we've been having an ongoing conversation for 3/4 of a century.
Sorry. Ms. McLeod. For 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to pick up a little bit where I left off. In your document, there's 10 recommendations, and when you gave us the update, all but 2 of them required the working with the Assembly of First Nations and that collaborative process. But the website didn't, but I just heard that the website does too. So basically, you're telling me that all 10 recommendations are going to be a collaborative process for you to move forward on. Is that accurate?
There's aspects of reporting that require collaboration with the Assembly of First Nations so that we can make sure that what we are reporting meets their needs and their interests.
Okay.
The specifics of the technicality around the website is an issue that we're working out with Shared Services Canada,
So basically,
and that doesn't involve others.
This chart should reflect that need. So then I see in your statements that you talked about that they had 4 areas of priority. So does that mean that we should be expecting a focus on the 4 areas of priority and real movement on them, and the other 6 are going to get left in a band site? Because I really want to understand how you're designing and working with these technical working groups to actually move forward in terms of some action. So, do you have a subgroup? Your technical working group, is it only on specific land claims, or is it on a whole host of issues related to First Nations?
There may be other work. There is other work going on with the Assembly of First Nations. This specific one we're talking about is just on specific claims resolution at this. And I would say that those 4 priorities, they're also ours. We identified them jointly with the First Nation, and it doesn't preclude us from having other discussions. We just thought, there's so many things that we're going to focus on these ones because they were of more importance.
And you're meeting how often?
We have been meeting, I think we've had 2 or 3 meetings over the last, we have subcommittee meetings. I should have had that number, I don't have it with me now. I've met 3 times since the summer on this, so we are trying to meet every couple of months on it. At the joint working group, and then do subcommittee work in between those meetings.
Would it be possible to sort of have a reflection tabled with this committee in terms of, dates of the meetings and who attended and the focus?
I'd want to confer with the Assembly of First Nations on that, but I think that if you're saying report back whether they're making progress from time to time, I think that's possible.
So I think it would be fair to say that, for example, the small claims, the 3 million, how you're going to move those forward in a more facilitative fashion. You haven't got to yet. You haven't dealt with that yet. Is that?
Talk about the change.
Well, sorry, we have in one sense. So there was a discussion about that case that said that you can't just send a letter. So we've changed our practice as a result of that. It doesn't preclude further work with the Assembly of First Nations and other stakeholders on ways to improve it. It is an issue. We haven't come up with any joint recommendations yet, though, if that was your question.
Okay, I'm going to switch topics just for a minute. As I go through the sort of chart in terms of how this process works, I'm from British Columbia and perhaps know better than anyone how important it is that we create resolution to these long-standing issues. I'm also live in a rural area, and the one person that I think seems to get left out regularly, is there any place where third parties fit into this, third parties that are going to be impacted in terms of decision making, where they're at least included or they're aware of what's happening? Again, whether it's ranchers or tourism operators, I have example after example where I think you would get to better specific land claim or specific claim resolutions if you also, in some cases, had that insight and perspective of, in often cases, people that have worked together in a valley side by side for years and years and years, and that's a piece that I see is missing.
So we need to distinguish between specific claims and land claims.
Yep.
Land claims has a completely distinct process that has public consultation embedded in it. And it depends on the nature of what is being addressed through a specific claim. So
I understand that. Thank you.
There are, depending upon the aspects, if a specific claim is bringing up return of lands, and if those lands are Crown lands, there's public consultations that occur in that regard. If it's strictly about dealing with cash compensation, then no, there wouldn't be public hearings on that aspect.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chandraria, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would like to place on record my anguish that the Deputy Minister is not here. According to my knowledge, the Deputy Minister is the designated official accountable for this. And the invite from the committee, the clerk may confirm, has gone to the Deputy Minister. And we have the Assistant Deputy Minister saying that he doesn't know why the Deputy Minister is not here. Having said that, I'm just looking at the recommendation and the key interim milestones. 6.45. The OAG recommendation is, in cooperation with First Nations, Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada should make its negotiation practices to expedite small value claims. The interim milestone states fall 2017, with the agreement of Assembly of First Nations Canada Joint Technical Working Group, strike a subcommittee to examine. You mean to say that we have to wait till fall of this year before a subcommittee is formed?
No, sorry, before we'd be able to get recommendations that we think might be joint recommendations. The subcommittee would be formed.
So, by fall of 2017, you're going to get recommendations from this subcommittee?
I think the reference there is to the Joint Technical Working Group, which I sit on, yes. We'll be trying, I mean, ideally, by next fall, we will be in a position to make recommendations to our Minister. The First Nations have their own political organizations that they need to get feedback from, that sort of thing.
Okay. Then recommendation 6.47. INAG should update its website to reflect the full range of negotiation practices for all types of specific claims. I come from the private sector. If a website is to be updated and if somebody tells me it takes 1 year to update the website, that is absolutely unacceptable to me. I see you have mentioned something to do with the shared services, but I guess that's the technical part. I think what OAG is suggesting is the content.
Yes, I think, so. Again, I don't want to speak for the Auditor General. So I think that the issue has been that First Nation groups would dispute the way we characterize certain parts of the way we're doing it. So the real work is to try and get to a common understanding of what we would call a file closed means. The First Nation, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but the way it's been explained to me is we call them closed because we're not working on them anymore because we don't see progress or they've gone to some other form. But the First Nations say, but the claims haven't gone away. They're still out there unresolved. So we need to find a way of communicating so that we understand that we're comparing apples to apples.
So Mr. Ferguson can kindly explain that recommendation. I'm still confused with this.
Well, the recommendation was simply that we saw a number of negotiation practices that have been talked about today, sending the letter and some of those things. A number of negotiation practices that the department had implemented that they had not communicated to the First Nations that was how they were handling those claims. So we felt simply that they should make the First Nations aware that this is how they are handling the claims. So explain how the claims are being handled, and the obvious way to make that available would be to put it on the website. So it was simply document what it is that you are doing, document how you are actually handling those claims, and let people know that's how you're doing it. Certainly, maybe the First Nations don't agree with it, but the starting point would be simply to let them know that that's how it's being handled.
That was my understanding, but I'm quite surprised it will take 1 year to do that, or more than 1 year for that matter.
Well, again, we're trying to do things collaboratively. We have been accused in the past of doing things unilaterally, so we post things which the First Nations say we had no input in, so they don't. So then it undermines the credibility of the reporting, is how I understand it. So we would like to do it as quickly as we can, and that was the timeline that we're trying to get to work to. Yes.
Sean, you want to use?
We have 20 seconds and it's
Okay.
5:30.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to our witnesses today, Mr. Gagnon, Mr. Wild, Mr. Ferguson, and Mr. Berthelette. This is obviously not an easy subject to discuss, and we may very likely call you back. We probably haven't finished, but I'll have to discuss with my colleagues to see. Thank you again for your presence, and we are adjourned.